Tonight, lawyers for President Trump are preparing to answer questions directly from Robert Mueller as the Russia probe continues. The former federal prosecutor joins us live to discuss that and other developments in the investigation. Then, will New York become the next state to legalize recreational marijuana? Both sides are digging in, and the battle continues. Also, the report on climate change that could be the most alarming warning yet. It says if the world doesn't act soon, it'll be too late. And on that note, happy Friday, good evening, and thanks for joining us here on RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in tonight for Richard French. We begin tonight with the Russia probe. President Trump's legal team is working on providing written answers to questions provided by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Those questions are specifically focused on whether the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. Also, the two sides are reportedly still negotiating about whether Trump himself will be interviewed in person about possible obstruction of justice. Trump's firing of FBI Director James Comey could fit easily into that category, and that is still one of the main focuses of the probe. Another development now, the federal judge in Virginia who presided over Paul Manafort's trial is now questioning the plea deal that Manafort made with federal prosecutors. Trump's former campaign chairman cut a cooperation deal with those prosecutors to avoid a second trial in D.C. A court hearing is set for next week to try and resolve all this, and also set a sentencing date for Manafort. He was found guilty on 8 federal charges in August. Well, if these are the topics, you know what's next. Joining us is former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel, our man on the Russia case. Good evening, Roland.
Hello, Andrew. Good to be here.
Nice to have you. And so let's start with all of these stuff. The written questions on collusion and conspiracy. It's on Russia. It's not on obstruction. I'm hearing some Trump supporters saying, well, I guess this means that Mueller's got nothing on conspiracy or collusion. Otherwise, why do written questions and not an interview? Is that take correct, Roland?
Not in my mind, Andrew. In my mind, if Mueller has actually agreed to forego a in-person interview on the issue of collusion, and we really don't know that. We're just hearing that from the Trump campaign or the Trump people. But if he has agreed to forego that, to me, that's a signal that he already has his mind made up on that and doesn't need to talk to Trump directly to test Trump's credibility on those points. It may be that Mueller's investigation has such dynamite evidence in terms of the computer forensics and the relationship between Roger Stone and the Russians and text messages perhaps between Stone and Trump, I'm just speculating, that they're never going to believe a denial by Trump of collusion in any event. Or it may be that they have absolutely no evidence of collusion. They've decided that's a dead case and we don't really need to question Mr. Trump about it to make that decision. But I do think that what this means is Mueller's made up his mind about whether there was collusion or not.
So it sounds like you're saying Mueller's either got a really, really strong case on collusion or a really, really weak case on collusion, and we're not going to know until we get to the other side of this?
I think that's right. I think, he has been so circumspect in terms of what he has revealed, in a very piecemeal fashion. We really don't know how powerful his evidence is on the collusion aspect. What we do know is that there was a very, very serious attempt by Russia to manipulate the election. We know that there was contact between the Trump campaign, at least in the person of Roger Stone and the Russians. But what we don't know is whether there really was coordination, collusion, conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Mr. Mueller probably does know, but we'll have to wait and see.
Roland, the biggest fear from the president's legal team about doing an in-person interview is that he's going to somehow walk his way into perjury. That's what we hear, the perjury trap, all the time. Right. You would think that wouldn't be an issue with these written answers. It's a take-home test. You get to review your work before you send it in. But is the president in the clear just going with written answers?
Andrew, you put your finger on an important point and why written answers are so attractive to the Trump legal team. The answers are far easier to control in that context, and they can avoid perjury to a much greater degree. They cannot avoid it entirely, however, if the question is, did you Were you told of the results of the meeting with Ms. Veselnitskaya on June 6, 2016, and Mr. Trump, in a written answer sworn under penalties of perjury, says no, and in fact the truth is yes, and there's an email that proves it, he could still be charged with perjury. But yes, I think the attraction of this procedure to Trump and his lawyers is that it allows them to control the answers much better than they could if they were asked in person and orally.
And again, I think you touched on this at the very beginning, but if Mueller is in fact giving written questions on collusion/conspiracy, does that, to your mind, indicate that that portion of the investigation is probably close to over? Not the entire part, but just the collusion conspiracy.
To me, I think it does, because I can't imagine a competent prosecutor, and Mr. Mueller is obviously much more than that, accepting written answers in a situation where a witness's credibility is important, unless his mind is made up and he already has the proof that he needs. So to me, this means that Mr. Mueller feels he kind of has this part of the case in the bag.
Well, we'll get to the Manafort question in just a second, but we are less than a month from the midterms, and everybody seems to think that either Jeff Sessions or Rod Rosenstein or both are just toast after the midterms. Do you think this is changing the thinking for Mueller? Do you think he's taking steps or taken steps to protect his investigation if his overseers are dismissed?
You know, I think he is so far along, Andrew, and so much evidence has been gathered at this point, and so much evidence has already been shared with other federal prosecutors like the Southern District of New York and other state prosecutors like New York State. I think Mr. Mueller must feel confident that the evidence he's gathered to date is secure, even if Rosenstein and Senator Sessions are removed from office. I think he's got to be confident that the investigation is far enough along that it cannot be derailed at this point.
All right, let's move on to everyone's favorite ostrich leather jacket owner, Paul Manafort. The Mueller team wants to delay the dismissal of his remaining charges from that Virginia case, the one the jury's still deadlocked on, until after Manafort's done cooperating. Seems like that makes sense to make sure he actually does cooperate, but the judge is now being critical of this. Who's right in your mind, Roland?
In my mind, this is sort of routine, and I'm sorry to be coughing, but I'm battling a head cold. In my mind, this is really routine prosecution. It's prosecution 101. Don't drop your charges against a cooperating witness unless and until that cooperation is complete. They want to maintain their leverage over Mr. Manafort. They want to be able to threaten him with additional prosecution if he doesn't cooperate and cooperate fully. This is all just routine prosecutorial behavior. I don't know why the judge is complaining of it. He has a remedy if he wants to invoke it, which is to say, I'm not putting up with that. We're going to put those charges where we had a hung jury back on the court's calendar for trial in mid-November. I'll see you November 15th, and let's swear a jury and get this done. On November 15th, the government will either have to try those charges or it'll have to dismiss them if it doesn't want to proceed. The judge can put the government's feet to the fire here, but it doesn't make any sense. Why do all that work if it may not be done at the end of the day anyway? The government has proposed a reasonable resolution. Mr. Manafort's agreed to it, and unless there's something wildly unreasonable about it, the judge should just acquiesce in it.
And this plea deal covers two different cases, sets of charges in two different cases from two different jurisdictions in two different courts with two different judges. It's the D.C. case and the Virginia case. The judge in the Virginia case, I mean, I just wonder, because that deal covers both and he's just the judge from one of them, he can blow up the deal that covers them both?
Yeah, he's the judge. He controls his own calendar. He doesn't have to do what the government asks him to do. He doesn't have to do that even if Mr. Manafort asks the judge to do what the government's asking him to do. He is the judge. He is all-powerful within the confines of his own courtroom, and if he wanted to see these charges resolved quickly, he could put them on his trial calendar. That would be a crazy thing to do, because it would put everybody to a whole lot of work that will probably, most likely, be unnecessary. But he's the judge, and he can do that if he wants to.
And you're the judge for us when it comes to all things Russia and Trump. Roland Riopel, former federal prosecutor, as always. Roland, thanks very much. Have a great weekend.
Yes, you too, Andrew. Pleasure to be here.
Likewise. All right. Over the next couple of weeks, right here on RFL, we're going to be bringing you 3 live congressional debates in key races across our viewing areas. The first one is coming up on Monday. We're going to be hosting a debate between incumbent Republican Congressman Leonard Lance and his Democratic challenger Tom Malinowski. That is in New Jersey's 7th District. 3 days after that, Thursday, October 18th, we swing over to Long Island for a debate in New York's 2nd District. That one features longtime Republican incumbent Peter King and Democrat Louisa Gretchen Shirley. Finally, on Tuesday, October 23rd, we host the candidates in the Hudson Valley's 18th Congressional District. Incumbent Democrat Sean Patrick Maloney, Republican challenger James O'Donnell. All the debates live at 6 p.m. right here, wherever it is that you watch RFL. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, the bizarre story of a Washington Post columnist disappearing from the Saudi consulate in Turkey. The Turkish president and the Saudi royal family are now clashing over it, and even President Trump is weighing in, and his reaction is almost as bizarre as the story itself.